Cerydra is by far one of the most controversial characters Hoyo has released in Amphorius, whether it be in story or in gameplay, and it's not hard to see why. In many ways, Cerydra is the first character of her kind. Not only is her character incredibly complex in the story, to the point where she can come off as straight up unsympathetic to the audience, but she is arguably the very first Harmony character to be classified as niche. Until Cerydra, Harmony characters were seen as the universally beloved path of the game, the characters that you can never go wrong with pulling for, even the ones like Sparkle. You must have heard it time and time again. Pull every Harmony unit, because having more supports on your account is never a bad thing, given how widely usable every Harmony unit in the game is. And then we got Cerydra. She came, she saw, she conquered.
I came. I saw. I conquered.
But did she really? What is it about Cerydra's kit that has people talking about how she doesn't live up to the hype of other Harmony units? Is it just the fact that she's niche? Or is it because her kit is actually weak? That's what we're here to talk about today. I have done just as much Cerydra testing as I have done Phainon testing, so I'm here to walk you through everything about Cerydra and whether or not she's worth your pulls. If you already know what Cerydra's abilities do, and you don't need a simple breakdown of her kit, skip ahead to this timestamp to start hearing my more in-depth opinions on Cerydra's worth and what things you should consider if you want to pull for her. Otherwise, let's briefly go over Cerydra's kit. But first, a word from the sponsor of today's video. LD Shop is a safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to buy currency across multiple different games, including Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, among other games. They offer prices at a discount, from anywhere up to 13% to 25% cheaper than topping up in-game. Not only are the prices cheaper, but they make topping up completely effortless. All you need is your server and game ID, and you're good to go. No hassle at all, and no personal information required whatsoever. After purchase, you can see that the Jades are sent to my account within 5 minutes. There are no downsides to using LD Shop for your purchases, as the prices on LD Shop are strictly better than the prices in-game. But the upsides don't stop there. Users who register using my link in the description below will get an exclusive 15% and 5% coupon, which can save you up to $50. Additionally, if you spend $80 in total, you can earn an express supply pass for completely free. If you want to top up at discounted prices with no downsides, using a website and method that has been approved as safe by multiple large content creators in the space, then click the link in the description below to head over to LD Shop and start saving money on your gacha game top-ups right away. Cerydra's basic attack is nothing special. You will notice later that she has some choices that attempt to buff her own personal damage, but just know that no amount of self-buffing in her kit is actually going to make her do damage. Her basic attack is basically no different from most other units. Cerydra's skill is the bread and butter of her entire kit. Her basic attack and even her ultimate are basically just cosmetic parts of her kit. This skill is the only thing that matters about Cerydra, and it does multiple things in conjunction with her talent, so let's talk about the skill and talent together. Cerydra's skill applies the military merit effect to a single ally. The military merit effect doesn't do anything on its own. Instead, it creates a stacking number underneath the ally's health bar. Think of it as being similar to the charge counter for Blade's follow-up attack, except obviously Cerydra's charge does something entirely different from Blade. Cerydra's military merit charges can stack up to 8 times. But how do you stack Cerydra's military merit? For starters, when Cerydra uses her skill, she adds 1 stack of military merit to the character she uses the skill on. But mainly, when the character under the military merit effect uses a basic attack or skill, they gain 1 charge, and that's the main way for them to stack it. Fairly simple stuff. Her talent also gives the character with the military merit effect a free attack buff, which is equal to 24% of Cerydra's attack. So if you stack attack stats on Cerydra, which is the ideal build for her, this attack buff can reach around a 1000 permanent attack buff, which is pretty nice. It's similar to Robin's attack buff, except Cerydra's is only for 1 ally. And yes, the military merit effect is permanent. It does not have a turn limit. Once an ally has been selected as the wielder of Cerydra's military merit, they will have that effect for the rest of the battle until they die, or unless Cerydra uses her skill on a different target to select someone else as the military merit wielder. Note that the charges of military merit get reset to 0 if Cerydra decides to change the character she uses her skill on mid-fight, but this generally isn't something you'll ever be doing. So, stacking up charges of military merit is simple enough. The ally simply needs to basic attack or skill. But what do these charges do? Well, while military merit can stack up to 8 charges, it only needs to reach 6 charges to activate its effect. At 6 charges, military merit upgrades to the peerage status. But don't think too hard about the status changing its name. It doesn't actually mean anything, and mostly just confuses you. All you need to know is that once military merit is at 6 charges, it allows your character's next skill to trigger twice using a new term known as kudeme. To help you visualize it, think of how Anaxa's skill allows him to immediately trigger a second skill at no cost after his first skill. Cerydra essentially allows every character to trigger this exact same effect when they reach 6 charges of military merit. After this double skill effect has been triggered, the ally loses 6 stacks of military merit, and they will have have to build the charges back up again via basic attacks and skills to get another double skill. At first glance, you might be thinking, wait, isn't this just a worse version of an action advance? Because action advancers also allow your character to unleash another skill, except they don't need to stack up to 6 charges in order to do it. And yes, to a certain degree, you're right. The mechanic does sort of just feel like a more convoluted, and in some ways, a worse action advance, because it's a delayed second skill for your DPS, whereas a character like Branya or Sunday can just instantly make your DPS take action and skill again with no delay or charging time required. Cerydra does still come with her own benefits though. For starters, Cerydra's double skill doesn't require any skill points. So when a character unleashes a double skill via Cerydra's Kudeme, the extra skill is completely free. Secondly, Cerydra gives some additional buffs to the copied skill, including 72% crit damage and 10% res pen. Do note that these buffs go away after you've used the double skill, so they aren't permanent like her 1000 attack buff and are mostly just there so your double skill can nuke harder every time you obtain it. The scarcity of Cerydra's buff uptime is one of the issues a lot of people have with her kit. After kits like Sunday or Tribi, where their buffs have seamless 100% uptime, the fact that so many of Cerydra's buffs have limited uptime can definitely feel a little bit underwhelming. The last thing to note about Cerydra's military merit effect is that the character with military merit gains a flat 20 speed buff, and she gives herself the speed buff as well. It's unfortunately 5 speed away from being the same value as speed boots, so you will still need to allocate some stats into speed if you want to use this speed buff to completely replace speed boots. But as long as you're able to manage that, Cerydra's 20 speed buff feels really nice in allowing you to run attack boots, essentially giving your DPS another 43% attack since she allows them to switch boots. Unfortunately, Cerydra's speed buff is limited to 3 turns for some reason, even though the military merit effect itself is permanent. We'll talk later about why this 3-turn uptime is somewhat of an issue. The final part of Cerydra's talent is that she deals additional wind damage each time the character affected by military merit attacks. Think of this as being similar to Robin or Tribi's additional damage, except only one character can trigger it. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it's just a little extra chip damage, and it mostly just exists to make sure her self-buffing traces that we'll see later don't feel like a complete waste. This additional damage is strictly single target, so AoE attacks will just randomly proc it on a single enemy rather than proccing it on all enemies in AoE scenarios. It has a trigger limit of 20 hits and refreshes its trigger limit whenever she casts her ultimate. Speaking of Cerydra's ultimate, it has an energy cost of 130, and her ultimate is mostly just there for cosmetic purposes to show off the fact that Cerydra does not know how to play chess. I mean, did you hear what she said during the 3.5 official livestream?
It means I won't hesitate, even if victory costs me my king piece.
Yeah, girl is speaking nonsense. But anyway, while the chessboard setup in her ultimate animation may not be ideal for winning a game, it does look very pretty, but the supposed AoE damage that it's supposed to be doing is incredibly underwhelming. You can mostly just ignore the damage portion of this ultimate and just think of it as a way of gaining 2 extra stacks of military merit charge, since that's the only other thing this ultimate does. Technically, it also assigns the military merit status to the first character in the party if no one else has it, but this is never going to be relevant thanks to her technique. Speaking of Cerydra's technique is very similar to Ranmei and Tribi's techniques, where it allows her to instantly cast her skill at the start of the next battle without requiring a skill point, and it gives her the energy from casting her skill, which is really nice. In my opinion, these types of techniques are the best types of techniques a Harmony character can have. It's very sad that Robin doesn't have this. If Robin ever does get a buff, which would probably have to be very far in the future, considering how powerful Robin still is, this would be one of the main changes I'd want to see for her. But anyway, this is about Cerydra, not about Robin. Since Cerydra's technique instantly casts her skill, she needs to be able to pick which teammate she casts the skill on, right? How does her technique choose? Well, it's simple. Whichever character you use to enter the battle with will be the target for Cerydra's instant skill from her technique. This means you can always choose who has the military merit effect at the start of battle, and since the effect is permanent, you never have to think about who to assign it to after that. For Cerydra's bonus abilities, her first one gives her a stacking crit damage buff for every 100 points of attack she has above 2,000, maxing out at a whopping 360% crit damage buff when she reaches 4,000 attack. And her second bonus ability gives her 100% crit rate for completely free. Insane, right? That's a lot of stats. Well, yes, but even if you sprinkle a million chocolate chips on cat poop, it's still going to taste like cat poop. It's a similar idea with Cerydra. All these self-crit buffs don't really do much when the multipliers of her attacks are so underwhelming. You can think of this bonus ability as a nice little something extra so that Cerydra can pretend she's contributing to the team's damage, but other than that, it doesn't mean much, and you don't even need to worry about hitting the 4,000 attack breakpoint to max out her self-crit damage buff, because it barely matters. Don't get me wrong, you do still want to get as much attack as possible on her, because her her attack buff for the ally scales off of her own attack as well, but just don't worry about it for this bonus ability specifically. Oh yeah, and Cerydra's second bonus ability also gives the ally 1 stack of military merit when they use their ultimate, but for some reason it only applies to their very first ultimate of the battle, which can feel very limiting, but at least it's something to help you reach the first double skill of a battle a little faster. Her third bonus ability has the speed buff for herself and the military merit ally we mentioned earlier. Aside from that, it also gives Cerydra 5 energy whenever the ally with military merit uses their basic attack or skill, so that's nice. We'll discuss how this impacts her energy rotations later. And these are her stat bonuses. Nothing too much to mention here. Cerydra's Eidolons are nothing too crazy, except for her E1. There is quite a bit to talk about in regards to Cerydra's E1, but in short, it's a lot stronger than you might think. 16% defense ignore is equal to Sunday's E1, but instead of having the extra defense ignore applied to a character's summon the way Sunday's E1 does, Cerydra gives 20% extra defense ignore when the double skill effect occurs. This extra defense ignore goes away after the double skill, so it's mostly a 16% defense ignore that occasionally goes up to a 36% defense ignore, which is nice when used with characters that can stack more defense ignore. Since defense ignore gets so much stronger the closer you get to 100% defense ignore. And while this is a decently strong damage buff as it is, the real value of Cerydra's E1 comes from the second part of it, the 2 energy when she casts her skill. Well, okay, 2 energy is nothing for 99% of characters in this game. It's barely going to impact their energy rotations. The character this is made for, and most impactful for, is of course none other than Phainon. We'll talk more about why and how she synergizes with Phainon later in the team building section, but this energy portion of her first Eidolon was made just for him, and it makes her E1 much stronger than it might seem. You see, for a lot of characters in this game, their early Eidolons are mostly just damage increases, especially for Harmony characters. Ron-Mei, Robin, Sunday, Tribby, all of these Harmony characters have E1s that are just bigger damage buffs, and the first part of Cerydra's E1 follows in that trend. But with the 2 energy on skill cast, Cerydra's E1 suddenly becomes more than just a damage buff. It completely changes the rotations in the team building of Phainon teams, and this is the real value of Cerydra's E1, not in the damage buffing, but in the way it changes your gameplay and the way you can build Phainon teams entirely. This extra energy on her E1 now allows every Cerydra skill to generate 2 core flame stacks for Phainon instead of 1, thanks to Phainon's bonus ability that gives him 1 extra core flame stack when he receives energy from an ability. When you pair Phainon together with Sunday plus Cerydra's E1, this trio alone is now capable of comfortably giving Phainon enough core flame stacks for 2 ultimates all within the first cycle, meaning your final teammate slot now becomes open to use any character of your choosing. Characters like Cypher or Tribby, who offer by far the most damage for Phainon, but are held back by the fact that they generate 0 stacks for his ultimate, are now suddenly very comfortable to use with him, all thanks to Cerydra's E1 making up for the lack of core flame stacks. You are now able to vertically invest into any strong support for the last slot in Phainon's team without worrying about how many core flame stacks they give, such as E1 Tribby. And even more so, any future character that releases, whether that be the upcoming Cyrene or even more broken damage buffers that release in 1 or 2 years, will now be able to slot into your Phainon team whether they give him stacks for his ultimate or not, all thanks to Cerydra's E1 plus Sunday carrying the core flame stacking generation. Or, if you'd rather go a more defensive angle, Cerydra's E1 now allows you to more comfortably slot in any sustain, such as the upcoming Dan Heng, into Phainon teams without worrying about core flame stack generation. Eidolons that give big damage buffs like Tribby's E1 are one thing, but an Eidolon that single-handedly completely opens up the team building and flexibility and the future-proofness of a team is very, very strong. Cerydra's E1 is not just the defense ignore. It's the defense ignore plus the flexibility of now being able to slot in stronger final teammates into Phainon's teams. However, please take note that you do not need Cerydra's E1. If your Cerydra is E0, just use a character that can help with core flame stacking in the final teammate slot for Phainon, such as Bronya. You will be totally fine using characters that actually synergize with Phainon. E1 Cerydra is mainly just so you can slot in universally broken characters that don't normally synergize with Phainon into his last teammate slot. But you definitely do not need to look at this as a must-have. With Cerydra's powerful E1 out of the way, the rest of Cerydra's Eidolons aren't great. Her E2 is a little bit of extra damage bonus for the ally, and a big amount of extra damage bonus for herself that still isn't enough for her to do impressive damage because her multipliers are just too awful. Her E4 attempts to remedy this issue for her ultimate, but it's still nothing amazing. Cerydra's E6 gives 20% res pen to herself and the ally with military merit, and it finally beefs up the damage multiplier of her additional damage procs to feeling significant. But it's an E6, and not a particularly outstanding E6. Her E1 is really the only one that should be talked about and considered, unless, of course, you just really love this short tyrant. As for her Lightcone options, Cerydra's Lightcone is incredibly unnecessary. It increases her own attack by a lot, which translates to a larger attack buff for the ally, which is nice, I guess. It also gives 54% damage bonus to whoever she uses her skill on, but this damage bonus only applies to skill damage, so already it's fairly niche in its use case. The last effect is the extra skill point it gives on her ultimate, which is nice and comfortable. However, in Phainon teams, which is her main use case, abilities. Her E1's extra core flame stack can essentially translate to more skill points anyway, since it frees up characters to basic attack more often, depending on the team and depending on whether or not enemy RNG causes Phainon to overcap on core flame stacks. So Cerydra's E1 is always a higher priority than her Lightcone for Phainon teams. And even for non-Phainon teams, her Lightcone is entirely unnecessary when she has good force options, such as Dance, Dance, Dance. Cerydra is a great user of Dance, Dance, Dance because she gets her ultimate relatively quickly in her best teams, and her ultimate doesn't do much anyway, so giving it an extra team-wide action advance is really nice. If you don't have Dance, 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 however, or if it's being used elsewhere, the new free event Lightcone, the Forever Victual, is fine as an attack statistic for Cerydra since her attack buff scales off of her own attack. She can also use any of the Forcer options that are usable with Robin for the same reason, such as for Tomorrow's Journey or Poised to Bloom. It should also be noted that the skill point generation from Cerydra's Lightcone only applies to ultimates that deal damage, so characters like Tingyan wouldn't be able to utilize this effect. The Lightcone can't be fully utilized on anyone other than Cerydra, and even then, it's a low priority pull for Cerydra. You're better off investing in other things first. So now that we've covered Cerydra's kit, let's dive into her team building options so that we can finally talk about the main thing there is to say about Cerydra. Cerydra is very niche. If it wasn't clear enough from the breakdown of her kit, Cerydra has a very specific type of character she wants to be paired with, and that is characters who scale off of attack and spam their skill button a lot of times so that they can quickly stack up her charges of military merit. If the character doesn't scale off of attack, they're not making use of most of Cerydra's buffs. If a character's main source of damage isn't their skill, what's the point of using them with Cerydra? And if the character isn't able to stack up her military merit charges fast by spamming their skill a lot, then why not just use an actual action advancer? Because Cerydra's double skill only really becomes equal to an action advance if a character is able to charge up the double skill frequently enough to get multiple uses out of it. With all of these things taken into account, there are only two characters I would ever recommend pulling Cerydra for at the current moment: Phainon and Anaxa. They're the only two characters who fit all of these requirements, and it's no exaggeration to say that she was made solely for these two characters. Archer technically also fits, but Archer just has better teammate options that fit with him more, so I wouldn't recommend pulling Cerydra just for Archer. You can check out my Archer guide video if you need to see his team building priorities. Anyway, Phainon and Anaxa are the characters you would use with Cerydra. Cerydra is not like other Harmony characters, where they have a clear best in slot but are universal enough to slot into other teams. Cerydra is not a character I would ever slot into other teams unless I had absolutely no other choice. I would even go so far as to say that you should think of Cerydra as being the same as pulling for an extra Eidolon for Phainon and Anaxa, because those are the only places she would be used. If you aren't looking to invest further into either of these two, Cerydra is not going to add much to your account when compared to other supports, even compared to Silverwolf, who is rerunning in the same patch as her and is more universal than her. Now, with all that out of the way, Cerydra is still the best in slot for both Phainon and Anaxa, but unfortunately, there are caveats that I have to mention here as well. First of all, Cerydra must be paired with a consistent action advancing character, such as Sunday or Branya, or situationally RMC or Sparkle. If you aren't using an action advancer who can double Phainon and Anaxa's actions, Cerydra just isn't able to get enough charges for military merit, and thus, her double skill is going to happen a lot less frequently for Anaxa. And in Phainon's case, he'll struggle to make full use of her double skill when he's in his ultimate. For Phainon specifically, as long as you're able to reach enough charges for Cerydra's military merit when he enters his ultimate, he'll be able to make use of 2 extra meteors in his ultimate thanks to Cerydra, which is very strong. Even though Cerydra's actual damage buffs aren't the best for Phainon, the fact that she enables 2 extra meteors for him in his first ultimate is enough to make her his best in slot support. Another thing that nobody seems to understand about Cerydra's double meteor is that most of its value is in the way it front loads Phainon's damage. The fact that Phainon's first meteor will activate twice makes Cerydra by far his strongest damage buffer, specifically against the first wave of enemies. In current content, this can actually be a detriment, because Phainon actually needs to take multiple turns in the first wave in order to not eat up too much action value in the second wave. However, I would wager that in the future, say in a few months down the line, the HP inflation of enemies are going to climb so high that having the ability to front load so much of Phainon's damage in the first wave, thanks to Cerydra, is going to be very valuable to make sure you can zero cycle the first wave. The problem with Cerydra comes after Phainon's first ultimate. Unless you purposefully stall Phainon's ultimate in order to build more stacks of military merit, Cerydra and Phainon struggle to get enough charges for 2 extra meteors in his second ultimate. Oftentimes, he only gets 1 extra meteor in his second ultimate, and her military merit's double skill effect activates on one of his unenhanced skills while outside of his ultimate. When Cerydra first releases, you probably won't run into this issue too often, since Cerydra and Phainon are going to be very strong on release and will kill most things in 2 ultimates. But as soon as the HP of enemies begins to increase, and your E0 Phainon and E0 Cerydra start to require more and more ultimates from Phainon in order to kill enemies, you will start to see this issue in how clunky Cerydra's stacks of military merit are. They just don't line up well with multiple Phainon ultimates, and you start wasting double skills on unenhanced skills outside of Phainon's ultimate. It can be very annoying. Of course, the double unenhanced skill skills can still help stack Phainon's ultimate faster, even if the damage is underwhelming, so it's still helpful in that sense, but it just feels bad to waste potential double meteors simply because Cerydra's military merit doesn't line up well with Phainon's rotations beyond the first two. Again, this won't be an issue for most people on her release, but it is something to think about for the future. And then for Anaxa, Cerydra's issue actually comes from the uptime of her speed buff. The fact that it only lasts for 3 turns means that Anaxa will eat through the uptime of her speed buff super fast when he's played in a -1 speed setup with Sunday or Bronya, where he essentially gets to take 2 actions every time it's his turn. This causes Cerydra to need to spam her skill every single turn to keep the speed buff active and make sure Anaxa doesn't desync from the -1 rotation with his action advancer. This isn't a huge deal as long as you can manage the skill points, and it's still helpful since Cerydra's skill spam does still add stacks to Anaxa's military merit charges to help him achieve more double skills, but just be aware of the skill point intensity of these rotations. You may find yourself needing to basic attack on Anaxa every now and then, even with a very SP positive sustain. Now, with these caveats aside, Cerydra is still very good for Phainon and Anaxa, and especially Phainon. 2 extra meteors is just very strong for Phainon, and Cerydra is comfortably Phainon's best in slot support. For Anaxa, Cerydra actually isn't a huge upgrade over his current teammates, such as Robin or Tribby, and there's a very strong argument that you would rather vertically invest into Robin or Tribby Eidolons instead of pulling for Cerydra, simply because Robin and Tribby are more universal and can slot into more teams beyond just Anaxa, while still competing with Cerydra in her own niche. So be sure you think of these options before you decide to pull Cerydra for Anaxa. Again, think of Cerydra as a decent Eidolon for Anaxa and a strong Eidolon for Phainon. If you wouldn't pull an Eidolon for these characters, don't pull Cerydra, unless you just really love her, of course, in which case, go for it. She can still be used in other teams, she'll just be a downgrade to other options. Now then, let's talk about how to build Cerydra. It's actually fairly simple. You stack as much attack as you can on Cerydra, similarly to Robin. Attack chest and attack orb are a must. The only real consideration is the boots and the rope, so let's talk about it. Attack boots or speed boots. Cerydra gets the same 20 speed buff from her skill that her military merit ally gains, so that somewhat takes care of the need for speed boots. However, there are some rotations where Cerydra can make use of speed boots if you want her to be really fast. For Anaxa, I would generally always recommend attack boots, and then you can just make sure she still outspeeds Anaxa with speed substats. Anaxa will also be on attack boots thanks to her speed buff, so just line them up properly using substats. Cerydra technically doesn't even need to outspeed Anaxa, but I like it more so she can give him more stacks of military merit before his turn, since she needs to skill spam anyway. You could also do some weird shenanigans where you build her hyperspeed on Eagle set, so she can occasionally loop Anaxa's turns and weave in a basic attack every now and then for more skill points, but like, do you really want to do that? As for Phainon teams, I have a whole video dedicated to multiple different builds for Cerydra in Phainon teams, depending on what sort of playstyle or rotation you want to play, and what Lightcones you have available to you. So go check out that video for a much more in-depth breakdown of how Cerydra's builds and rotations will look like in Phainon teams. The one thing I will say is that most of those Phainon build and rotations assume you're running Cerydra with Bronya. However, if you choose not to run Cerydra with Bronya, then there is an additional rotation that I'll talk about here. Basically, in Phainon teams, all of your supports are taking 2 turns under the assumption that we're building our team around 2 Phainon ultimate rotations. The main goal with Phainon is to give him 2 ultimates, all within only 2 turns on each of your characters. 1 turn for his first ultimate, and then a 2nd turn for his second ultimate once he exits his first ultimate. If you're using Bronya, then all that matters is that Bronya is the last character to take action, since Phainon needs to enter his ultimate with her skill buff. So, as long as Cerydra is outspeeding Bronya, you're fine. Ideally, your Cerydra is able to achieve this using attack boots, and just getting enough speed from her 20 speed buff and substats. There was one rotation in the Phainon video where I mentioned giving Cerydra the Eagle set to sneak in a 3rd turn on Cerydra while still going before Bronya. The reason you would want to sneak in a 3rd Cerydra turn instead of only taking 2 turns is because it allows you to generate 1 extra skill point, or to generate 1 extra core flame stack for Phainon if you have the skill points to cast an extra Cerydra skill. Well, if you aren't using Bronya, then you don't need the Eagle set to squeeze in this 3rd Cerydra turn, because now Cerydra doesn't need to go before Bronya. As long as Cerydra is still squeezing in her 3rd turn and enough action value for Phainon to rotate through 2 ultimates within a timely manner, you'll be okay. So, in order to achieve this, you would require Dance 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 to be on the team, whether it's held by Cerydra or someone else, and Cerydra would need to be on Von Whack with 157 speed if your DDD is S1, or 147 speed if your DDD is S5. Note that this is her speed stat outside of combat. Once she enters combat, she gains 20 more speed, which shoots her up to 177 or 167 depending on your DDD superimposition level. In these rotations, Cerydra goes first in the rotation, and then you rotate through Phainon and Sunday or whoever, and then you end the rotation with another Cerydra turn before Phainon enters his first ultimate. Then, for Phainon's second ultimate, Cerydra still has enough speed to take her 3rd turn here to help build up Phainon's second ultimate. Again, this only works if you aren't using Bronya, since Bronya no longer needs to be the last character to take action. Obviously, this much speed requires speed boots on Cerydra, but the benefit is that you're able to run Sacerdos on her for more crit damage, and you can get away with an attack attack rope in this build because she can get enough energy for moving 3 times so long as she's spamming her skill, which is admittedly very SP intensive, but the trade-off between losing attack boots for speed boots and losing an energy rope for an attack rope is basically the same, and you get more buffing from Cerydra compared to Eagle. Again, it's just very skill point intensive. For me personally, I don't think this rotation is very worth it unless your Cerydra is E1, partially because this rotation inherently requires removing Bronya. If you're playing a Bronya team, just stick to one of the rotations from the Phainon plus Cerydra video. But if your Cerydra is E1, suddenly you can remove Bronya from the team without any issues. And this rotation really helps her E1 ensure that she's giving Phainon enough core flame stacks. Not to mention her E1 is what makes spamming Cerydra's skill feel a lot more worth it. So in general, I would say speed boot Cerydra in teams without Bronya is more of an E1 strategy. And if you are getting E1 Cerydra, I would even go so far as to recommend this build. Again, assuming you're dropping Bronya. I'll drop a link to a video of the E1 rotation in the description of this video, so be sure to check that out. There was also one speed boots build rotation for Cerydra in the Phainon team building video I mentioned earlier, so that one is also still valid. But outside of these scenarios, attack boots Cerydra is usually going to be the correct build for most players. Again, just make sure you still have decent speed from substats. It's not like Cerydra has any other substats she's looking for anyway, besides attack and speed. Now, for her rope, energy rope or attack rope? The answer is... it depends. For Phainon, I recommended energy rope for all of the rotations in the video where I go over Cerydra's build when paired with Bronya. However, as I stated earlier, if you're running Cerydra at the 147 speed Von Rack DDD build without Bronya, aka the E1 Cerydra rotation, then you can get away with an attack rope as long as you spam her skill, and she'll be able to get her ultimate without an energy rope. Outside of that one rotation though, an energy rope is necessary unless Cerydra is taking a lot of hits from enemies. For Anaxa teams, it's a bit more complicated. Under the assumption that Anaxa is getting double turns because he's being played properly with Sunday or Bronya, Anaxa gets 8 skills over the course of 2 turns, and we'll assume an extra 2 skills from Cerydra's Kudama effect triggering, for a total of 10 Anaxa skills. Thanks to Cerydra's bonus ability giving her 5 energy every time Anaxa uses his skill, this equals 50 energy for Cerydra, plus the 60 energy from her using her skill twice in 2 turns, plus the 5 energy from her ultimate. All in all, Cerydra gets 115 energy in just 2 turns. Again, she has an energy cost of 130. As long as she's using a planar ornament that gives 5% energy, such as Lushaka, this becomes 120 energy in 2 turns. She's 10 energy short of a 2-turn ultimate. An energy rope could solve this and make sure you get a consistent 2-turn ultimate rotation on Cerydra, which is nice and comfy. On the other hand, she only needs 1 hit of enemy RNG every 2 turns to make up for this missing 10 energy. It's up to you how much you want to rely on enemy RNG for that 10 energy every 2 turns or not. In short, she can absolutely get away with an attack rope. Just know that you might sometimes end up just 10 energy short of her ultimate, which will be sad. But additionally, as you can see, the fact that she can easily achieve 2-turn ultimates with Anaxa makes her a very strong user of Dance Dance Dance. So those are the things to take into account when it comes to Cerydra's builds. The boots and rope are very dependent on what you're trying to achieve with her. But all in all, stack as much attack as you can elsewhere and you'll be fine. 4000 attack is the breakpoint for her own self-crit damage buff, but you don't need to feel the need to reach that because obviously her self-crit damage buff is negligible. Just aim for as much as attack as you can get for her attack buff while maintaining good speed substats if you need them for the rotation you're attempting to achieve. She isn't too picky about her relic set. If you need the Eagle set to achieve certain rotations, such as the DDD rotation in the Bronya team setup from the other Cerydra video, then that will feel really nice to squeeze in a 3rd turn before Bronya, which is mainly just for SP purposes. Cerydra can also run the new SP set. It doesn't do much for her since the crit damage is negligible for her, but it can still be nice just for the SP, and it's just a better version of the Passerby set, which was already a consideration for her builds in the Bronya rotations. So it's nice for an extra skill point on every new wave of enemies, translating to 2 extra skill points in Memory of Chaos. Your Sustain can also run this set though, or just any other character, and only 1 character per team can hold this set, so if someone else is using it, then obviously don't use it on Cerydra. But if your other characters are better at using other relic sets, such as Sunday needing to stay on Sacerdos, then Cerydra can hold this SP relic set just fine. Outside of that, Sacerdos is good on Cerydra, even in rotations where she only gets 1 stack of the crit damage buff, or you can even run her on 2-piece attack builds like with Robin. With Anaxa, you basically always run Sacerdos on Cerydra since she's spamming her skill. And yes, if you didn't know, Sacerdos can stack when used by multiple characters. So Sunday and Cerydra can both spam Sacerdos buffs on Anaxa for a total of 72% crit damage. As for her planar ornaments, Von Rack feels really good on Cerydra in a lot of Phainon rotations. Other than that, she can hold Lushaka just fine. And when paired with Anaxa, Penacony is also fine since they share an element. As long as she's using one of the 5% energy planars, you'll be fine. Since that 5% energy actually can make a big difference in giving her her ultimate with some help from enemy RNG. It's not like any of the other planers are great for her anyway, aside from the 5% energy planers. And that's all there is to discuss about Cerydra's kit, team building, and relic builds. There is quite a bit to consider when it comes to whether or not you should pull for Cerydra. First off, once again, you should only consider pulling her if you want to upgrade your Phainon or Anaxa specifically. And if it's for Anaxa, you should consider whether or not you'd be better off vertically investing in your more universal supports who can be used on more teams while also competing with Cerydra for Anaxa, such as Triby or Robin. For Phainon, Cerydra is undoubtedly always the best option for Phainon, but you can always consider her on a rerun when your Phainon starts to struggle, since you should think of her as more like a Phainon Eidolon rather than being a character that can be slotted on other teams when your Phainon starts to lag behind. She is very much tied to the hit with him, and when he starts to struggle, she will also start to struggle. If you need advice on who to invest into between Cerydra versus Phainon Eidolons, watch this video that I made during Phainon's banner. In short, Phainon's E2 is stronger but more expensive, while Cerydra is a cheaper upgrade. There's then also the consideration of upcoming supports who may be more universal than her, such as Cyrene. Sadly, we don't have enough information on Cyrene yet to know what she'll do, but it's worth thinking about before you choose to invest in Cerydra. But if you still want Cerydra after all of these caveats and things to consider, then she will be a noticeable upgrade to your Phainon team. And I think her real value with Phainon will only improve if Phainon ends up relying more on her front-loaded damage to zero cycle the first wave of endgame content to help him set up to clear the second wave faster. For Anaxa, she also feels really good with him since she also enables him to achieve 2 extra skills within the first cycle, which Robin technically also does since she 100% action advances both Anaxa and his action advancer, such as Sunday or Branya, but Cerydra mostly feels like a more comfortable Robin for Anaxa in the sense that she doesn't have as many energy issues. So, is Cerydra worth it? The better question is it worth it to you to spend pulls on a really strong Phainon Eidolon, or at worst, a mediocre Anaxa Eidolon? If the answer is yes, then go for it. As long as you really love those characters and you also like Cerydra, then you'll feel her impact for sure. But if a glorified Eidolon for Phainaxa doesn't sound worth it, then maybe wait and see if any future characters are able to make use of her. She's sort of similar to Sparkle if Sparkle released in the modern day and age. You pull her mainly for Archer, and she does still have some lesser and niche synergies, but other than that, would you really pull for Sparkle in the big 2025? It's questionable. The same goes for Cerydra, despite the fact that this is her initial release and not her rerun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful or enjoyable to you in some way. If it was, consider liking the video and comment down below how you feel about Cerydra. Again, I know she is a very controversial character and everyone is sure to have their own thoughts on her, so I'd love to discuss it with you. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want more content like this, not just for Cerydra and Phainon, but for all future characters as well. There is especially more content on the way for Dan Heng, PT, and Evernight, so look forward to that. Until next time!